Hello and welcome to Eye on Africa here on France 24. I'm Clarisse Fortuné and these are the headlines. A meeting that should have been a breakthrough will not take place. M23 rebel group says it will not attend Tuesday's peace talks with the DR Congo government. A last-minute decision that comes after the EU imposed sanctions on the M23 group leader and on Rwanda army commanders. Almost at the same time, Kigali cut diplomatic ties with Belgium. So these are the state of current affairs that might inspire the writers of tomorrow. Paris hosted the largest African book fair in Europe, bringing together hundreds of authors, including an 11-year-old writer whose tales have already been published. We start with the diplomatic efforts to put an end to the conflict in eastern DRC. What should have been a major breakthrough Congolese government meeting the M23 rebel group in the first direct negotiations has now been on hold. At the last minute, the M23 has pulled out, but DR Congo says it will attend Luanda peace talks on Tuesday despite the snub. Emmett Livingston in Kinshasa has more.
It was supposed to be a momentous step, potentially pausing the fighting in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. The Congolese government had agreed to meet representatives from the M23 rebel group in Angola's capital, Luanda, for face-to-face talks on Tuesday. Congo had for years refused to negotiate directly with the M23, which is supported by thousands of Rwandan troops, arguing that it must instead negotiate with the rebels' masters, Rwanda. The government eventually agreed to talks after M23 and Rwandan forces captured eastern Congo's two largest cities in a violent offensive that started in January. The M23 has repeated since it launched its campaign in 2021 that it wants direct negotiations, and it initially agreed to the talks on Tuesday. But on Monday evening, it pulled out, citing international sanctions as undermining efforts to solve the conflict. On Monday, the European Union sanctioned 9 people for their role in sustaining conflict and minerals trafficking in eastern Congo, including the president of the M23 and 3 senior Rwandan military commanders. African and Western diplomats hoped that direct talks might at least pause the devastating fighting in eastern Congo, which has continued in the province of North Kivu in recent weeks. The prospect of the fighting coming to an end now appears dim.
And one of the reasons given by the M23 that prompted the boycott is the EU new sanctions against several Rwandan officials over Rwanda's alleged support for the M23 armed group. Almost at the same time, Kigali cut diplomatic ties with Belgium, its former colonial power from 1920 to 1962. Rwanda had already suspended Belgian development aid programs on its territory back in February. Our correspondent in Kigali, Juliette Montilli, tells us more.
Belgian diplomats have been given 48 hours to leave Rwanda, marking a complete breakdown in diplomatic ties between the two countries. In a statement that signals the height of tensions between Kigali and Brussels, Rwanda's foreign ministry accuses Belgium of unfairly siding with Kinshasa. Speaking at a rally in Kigali yesterday, President Paul Kagame had already lashed out at Belgium, blaming it for spearheading international condemnations against Rwanda over its alleged support for the M23 offensive in eastern DRC. But this latest statement goes even further. It points to Belgium's colonial past, accusing it of fostering ethnic extremism, which, according to Kigali, not only led to the 1994 genocide against the Tutsis, but continues to fuel instability in the region today. The decision comes just as the European Union announces fresh sanctions targeting Congolese officials linked to M23, as well as 3 senior Rwandan military officers and the head of Rwanda Mines Board. For his part, Belgium's Foreign Minister Maxime Prévost has responded on X, calling the move disproportionate and saying he regrets the decision.
And yet diplomatic efforts had already started this Monday. Zimbabwe hosted a joint meeting with the East African Community and the Southern African Development Community to discuss the escalating conflict in eastern DRC. The meeting follows the recent SADC military's decision to end its mission there. Sharon Mizengio attended the event in Harare.
The Eastern Africa Community and SADC joint meeting called for the immediate ceasefire and said that the peace talks on the 18th of March are the only way that will bring peace to the DRC. The joint meeting also noted the rise of the humanitarian crisis in the DRC and called for intervention from the international community.
It is important that we have an immediate ceasefire and that all parties converging at the table for talks are the only potent options to bring sustainable peace in the DRC.
There was also noted talks about the withdrawal of the troops. The date of the withdrawal of the troops wasn't mentioned, but there was talks for cooperation and support to avoid any further damage.
I would like to really call for cooperation and support as this phased withdrawal of SADC mission commences. We would not want to leave a vacuum that generates even more problems.
The joint meeting ended with calls for peace and urgent calls to address the humanitarian crisis in the DRC.
And in other news, and in another case of tough diplomacy, this time in Washington over the weekend, South Africa's ambassador to the US was expelled after he called President Donald Trump's administration supremacist. Ebrahim Rasool was given 72 hours to pack up and leave the US. The expulsion is among a long list of spats leading to the deteriorating relationship between the two countries. Tom Kennedy has more from Cape Town.
So what caused Ebrahim Rasool to be expelled from the US were these comments that he made during a webinar with a South African think tank where he accused Donald Trump of supremacism and said that the MAGA movement was a response to a declining number of white voters in the US. But this is really just the straw that broke the camel's back. There are reports that Rasool has been excluded over the last weeks from meeting with his US counterparts, and this is really just a symbol of a deteriorating relationship between South Africa and the US. The US has been highly critical of South Africa's ICJ case against Israel and its ties with Iran. On top of that, it's boycotted G20 meetings, criticizing the themes of climate resilience and diversity. And on top of that, Washington has also been highly critical of a newly signed expropriation law, which it says is racist against white farmers. Now, the reactions in South Africa have been mixed. The EFF and PAC, the Pan-African parties here, have been highly critical of the US, saying that South Africa should not let itself be bullied by Donald Trump, whereas President Cyril Ramaphosa has taken a more measured approach. He said this is merely a hiccup and that his priority is to re-strengthen ties with the US. Now it's up to his government to find a replacement for Rasool, who's expected to return to Cape Town on Friday.
And a quick note about the big voice reduced to silence, the radio Voice of America after 83 years of service. Trump's administration began mass layoffs. VOA, which is funded by the American Congress, reaches a weekly global audience of more than 350 million people on multiple platforms, TV, radio, and digital. On the continent, the service reaches more than 25 million. Radio Free Europe and Asia with Radio Marti are also impacted. And a bit of sports. Sebastian Coe is one of the frontrunners among the 7 candidates in the election to succeed Thomas Bach as leader of the Olympic movement. The vote takes place next Thursday in Costa Navarino, that's in Greece. The president of World Athletics talked to Selena Sykes about the importance of Africa in the Olympic world.
You couldn't do my job without recognizing the importance to us of Africa. Track and field is a religion in many parts of Africa, and we need to build on that. And I see the Olympic movement and the potential of growth in the Olympic movement being critical that we get our policies in Africa correct. And it's not just about sitting there saying, well, we hope one day to stage a World Championships or an Olympic Games. You need a proper glide path, you need a proper program, you need proper planning, and you need steering groups to do this. And that will be one of the first objectives if I become president. Africa is critical to the growth of Olympic sport.
And after sport, a bit of culture. This weekend saw the 4th edition of the Salon du Livre Africain, the African book fair, the largest in Europe. Hundreds of authors and publishers who traveled to meet their international public. Clémence Valère and Aurélie Coumin were among them.
Passionate encounters between African authors, publishers, and their international fans. Over the weekend, thousands of people flocked to this hall, either to meet the minds behind the works or to discover new reads.
As a publisher, we find it hard to be distributed among the diaspora in Europe. And so this fair, I'd say, really puts the spotlight on our books.
For many, the fair is also an opportunity to showcase African writing and literature.
It puts Africa and African books a little more center stage. We tend to think that other people write for us, but that's not true. I'm really proud to be here today.
This year, Cameroon is the guest of honor. A number of Cameroonian authors, publishers, and organizations answered the call.
Cameroon is the source of my imagination. All my books are about Cameroon, about Cameroonians, and about the way in which we are part of both our personal and national history.
It is also the place where authors receive the famous Grand Prix Afrique, formerly known as the Grand Prix d'Afrique Noire. This year, Cameroonian author Hemley Boom is the lucky laureate for the second time. Another prize was awarded for Christian Eboulé's historical novel, Charles' Testament, which retraces the life of a Gabonese soldier killed by German troops during World War II.
And one of my favorites among the writers, the youngest authors, Mariam Mbo. She's 11 years old and her storybook is already published.
I am the author of the book Mbo's Fairy Tales, which I wrote when I was exactly 9 years old. I came here not only to take part in the book fair, but also to sell my book.
And remember her name, Mariam Mbo. She concludes our edition of Eye on Africa. Thank you for watching. More news coming up.